treat evolution and science as if it were a foreign language. Do you have to love the French to be able to speak French? No. You can take the entire country is full of a bunch of wine slurping, cheese munching, surrender monkeys. But when it comes to a test, it's Je m'appelle Gregg. Okay. You need to speak it. You don't have to believe it. And this will help you if you ever go on to a university someplace, because frankly, you're going to have to come to terms with evolution one way or the other if you're taking any science at all, because it is the basis of modern science. So just treat it as a foreign language. And it's okay on your test when I ask you stuff about evolution, if you can tell me, what I'm about to say I do not really believe. You can write that in. But when I ask you, how long ago did human beings originate? 2 to 5 million years. And what continent? It's Africa. All right. This is basic physical anthropology. Anybody take any physical anthropology? A little bit. Okay. Physical or cultural? Physical. Physical. Okay. So this is, let me apologize to you, because what I'm about to give is way too simplistic. I'm boiling down all of physical anthropology. But as a sociologist, I mean, remember, anthropology is the closest discipline to sociology. This stuff is fascinating as well. The origins of our species. What do we know from physical anthropology, from the fossil record? As best we can tell, human beings originate in which continent? I just said it. Africa. Africa. We are connected to what other group of animals? We are basically large, hairless what?
Apes.
Apes. More specifically, some people say we're descended of monkeys. Oh, no, we're not. We're not descended of monkeys. It's a very different set of animals from apes. No, we're descended of apes. Apes include what? Gorillas, orangutans, bonobos, chimpanzees. Okay. Now, which of those are we closest to? Are those apes? Which are those are we closest to? Our species. Chimpanzees and bonobos. Yeah, chimpanzees and bonobos. There was a book written by a physical anthropologist called The Third Chimpanzee. What was he talking about? What species? Us. We are just basically, biologically, large, fairly hairless, pretty smart chimps. So you got chimps, you got human beings. What's the third? Bonobos. All right. Do we know that human beings share a lot of characteristics of chimps and bonobos? Yep, we sure do. We sure do. Take a class in physical anthropology, take a class in primatology. That is the study of primates. Chimps. Chimps. Are they pretty smart animals? Yes, they are. We've already talked about the fact that have chimps in the wild been observed to make and use tools? Yes, they have. Remember termite fishing? I think we talked about that in this class, right? They're using a stick to fish around and eat termites. That's a pretty sophisticated activity on the part of that chimp. That's a pretty smart animal. Interesting, at least for a period of time, can chimps walk on 2 legs? Yeah. I mean, they look a little bit like a drunken sailor. You know, they really want to go faster down on 4. But for a period of time, they can walk on 2 legs. A lot like a human being. And what else is very similar amongst chimps to human beings? And this broke Jane Goodall's heart. Jane Goodall was a very famous primatologist who spent most of her life out in the wilds of Africa hanging out with chimps. What else did chimps do? Oh, now that was something that was taught to them. Now, we'll talk about that experiment later on. They did not develop that on their own. It took human beings to do that. And we'll talk about Washoe and that famous experiment later, probably next week. Now the key is, what do they engage in? Violence. Do chimps go to war? You know, people sometimes say, you know, human beings are the only species that kill members of its own species. Garbage. No. Do chimps kill each other groups of chimps? Oh yeah. Do male chimps go on kind of war parties, raiding another group of chimps and killing the males, and then stealing the females? Yep. Does that look like human behavior? Unfortunately, it does. But how about, an anthropologist was saying, look, Here's a way to see out chimps. You know, chimps are an awful lot like human societies. They're very hierarchical. You've got the alpha male that controls things and dominates. And see how this works? He says, throw something that's highly desirable that chimps have never seen into the group. I don't know, a box full of toys or something. And what's going to happen is that the largest male will grab it for himself and then lord it over the other chimps. Does this sound a lot like human beings? Pretty much. Pretty much. On the other hand, there are also bonobos that also sound very much like us, but in a very different way, surprisingly, from chimpanzees. Anybody know about bonobos? You learned about bonobos in your, yeah. What are bonobos famous for?
Sex.
Exactly, they're famous for sex. Lots and lots of sex. Bonobos are famous. They're sometimes referred to as the hippies of the animal kingdom. How come?
Make love, not war.
All right, throw the same box into a group of bonobos. Now, something that's desirable that not everybody can have disrupts their social order. And when their order is disrupted, bonobos become upset. And when a bonobo is upset, what do they want to do? Each other. Sex, 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 sex. Everybody's having sex, sex, sex. And, you know, they believe in, you know, heterosexual sex, but they also believe in no, you know, any port in a storm, which means, well, they also engage in homosexual sex. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. People sometimes say, yeah, homosexuality never appears in the animal kingdom. Well, you haven't heard anything about bonobos, have you? Okay, and then, after all this sex, they relax and kind of share the toy together. They're much more cooperative than other chimps. They're much more social. They're actually very empathetic as well. And this is a startling human trait. Empathy means they have sympathy for members of their own species, even for other species. The same anthropologist I just described was running bonobos through an obstacle course to see how intelligent they were, how quickly it took them to learn to go through this obstacle course. As they went through, each bonobo would go through one at a time. They come to the end of the obstacle course. He was timing them, and then they get a little banana or something to reward them. Now, one after a time they came in, and then one of the last bonobos was an older male who had a heart condition, just like us. And the lack of oxygen to the brain interfered with cognition, which means the poor guy was not that bright. And he got lost in the middle of the obstacle course and began to whimper and cry. And that's exactly what another bonobo found. Another bonobo who had already gone through the obstacle course without any urging from the anthropologist at all, heard the cries of this older bonobo, went right back into the obstacle course, found the old guy, took him by the hand, and let him out. Oh, the bonobos. Another bonobo, he said, observed there was a little bird that had fallen out of its nest and was on the ground, and this bonobo carefully picked it up, climbed the tree, and let it go so it could fly away. Now, of course, the little bird went, meow. But on the other hand, did that bonobo feel empathy, sympathy for this little baby bird? Oh, the bonobos. Okay, so are a lot of these traits very similar to what we find in human beings? War, aggression, dominance, but also empathy, high sexuality. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what we know is 2 to 5 million years ago, we shared a common ancestor with chimps and bonobos. 2 to 5 million years ago. And I know there's a big debate amongst anthropologists, is it 3 million to 4 million, but we're just doing a big sweep of time, because we're not anthropologists here. 2 to 5 million years ago, we shared a common ancestor with chimps and bonobos. And you can tell this even just basically in our DNA. You take apart our DNA and compare that to a chimp or bonobo, about 98.5%, almost 99% of our DNA is identical to a chimp or a bonobo. Are we tied to them? Of course. There's so much biological evidence here. What's happening is this early pre-Homo, pre-Australopithecus ancestor is living in trees. That is their world. Largely in trees, and you can tell that by our own physiology. Now, we're a little too big to be in trees very effectively, but you can tell by our binocular vision we are literally arboreal animals living in trees, because binocular vision is really good for what? Judging distance. which is what you need to be able to do if you're leaping from branch to branch. Okay. Our vision is also very good at distinguishing color, which is very important if you're living in trees and eating mostly what? Bananas, fruits, nuts, berries. I can tell the difference in shades of, there's kind of a purplish shade, and that's different than this shade of purple here. Why is that important? So you can tell what's ripe and what's not. On the other hand, these are not good eyes at night on the ground. How come? I can see it, I can, oops, gone. What's the problem? If you're on the ground, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Do we see very well at night? Nope. These are not the eyes of a carnivore. These are eyes of an animal. Well, every so often eat meat, but mostly eats fruits, nuts, berries, and vegetable material. On the ground at night, what are we? Dinner for any alpha predator. What's happening now is 2 to 5 million years ago, the trees are disappearing. There's a climatic change, and that is very typical what drives evolution. Anytime there's a change in climate or in a food source, then evolution starts working overtime to try and adapt to those changing conditions. So, out of the tree comes our early ancestor. Small, little chimp-like animal. Begin to differentiate from the chimps. The first are small, little animals called Australopithecines. This little chimp-like animal has the brain case of a chimp. It has the size of a chimp, but what is its one noticeable human feature? The earliest human feature to develop amongst these very early pre-human ancestors, and any human ancestor is called, the whole group of them is called a hominid. It used to be hominid, but the anthropologists just changed it here a couple of years ago. So now it's hominid. So all human ancestors, once we divide off from the chimps and the bonobos, anything from there on out is called a hominin, leading to our human. They're all our direct human ancestor. One of the earliest of these was a fossil we actually gave a name to. Her name was a female, called Lucy, very famous. Usually anthropologists will find a single bone and have to try and reconstruct the entire skeleton. This was nearly an intact skeleton. Little Lucy looked a lot like a chimpanzee. Small, hairy, small brain, at least compared to ours, more chimp-like in size. But remember, a chimp is a pretty intelligent animal compared to a lion or a snake or something like that. And that first noticeable human trait was what? What could Lucy do?
She could walk on 2 legs.
2 legs, called bipedalism. That was a breakthrough, because when you walk on 2 legs, it allows you to what? It frees up your hands. And probably what's happening is early provision. That is, the trees are not disappearing all at once, but they're getting farther and farther apart. So this little hominid grabs stuff in trees, runs back, and carries it back to home base, where its young are. That allows it to be more and more efficient. And it allows it now, as the trees are disappearing, it's being replaced by grassland called savanna. Savanna is not grass, it's grass. And because if you're taller, you can see over the grass,